No, I don't. I just said I'd like you to. Either way, it makes no difference.
She was the face of old Hollywood, draped in diamonds, immortalized on silver screens, and crowned with a beauty that left the world breathless. But behind Elizabeth Taylor's radiant public image lived a truth far more complicated. Because what the cameras captured was only half the story. Elizabeth Taylor lived a double life, one as a glamorous icon adored by millions, and another as a deeply scarred woman quietly battling the price of fame, manipulation, and a childhood stolen by the machine of Hollywood. She didn't grow up like the rest of us. By the time she was 9, she was already under contract. By 15, she was one of the most recognized faces in America. But that recognition came at a cost. Powerful men in tailored suits didn't see a child chasing dreams. They saw a commodity, a fantasy. They praised her beauty, not her innocence. They sculpted her image, shaped her into an ideal, and in doing so, erased the girl she really was. Elizabeth was objectified long before she even knew what the word meant. In an industry built on illusion, she was expected to be perfect. Always polished, always poised. But while the public saw her as a goddess, behind closed doors, she was drowning. Fame didn't shield her from exploitation. It magnified it. And as she grew older, the chaos didn't stop. It evolved. Her personal life became headline news. Her heartbreaks became tabloid spectacles. She was married 8 times, each relationship playing out like a public drama. But no love story drew more attention or more fire than her volcanic romance with Richard Burton. Their connection was instant, electric, and explosive. They fought fiercely and loved even harder. They married, divorced, remarried, and divorced again. The world watched them burn for each other, unable to look away. For Elizabeth, it may have been the only love that felt real in a life full of staged affection. But even their passion couldn't outlast the damage already done. Because the truth is, Elizabeth Taylor never got the chance to simply be. Not as a girl, not as a woman. From her earliest years, she was pulled into a world where her worth was tied to how others saw her. And while the public worshipped her beauty, very few ever saw the bruises beneath it. For all her beauty, all her fame, and all the diamonds that adorned her neck, Elizabeth Taylor's life was anything but charmed. Beneath the glitz was a trail of personal tragedies that would have broken almost anyone else. But she endured them, publicly, painfully, and without the luxury of privacy. One of the most devastating chapters came in 1958, when her third husband, Mike Todd, died in a sudden and horrific plane crash. He had been the great love of her life, the one man she said truly adored her for who she was, not just the image she represented. His death shattered her. One moment she was basking in happiness, the next she was a widow with a child, clutching memories that would never age. But the heartbreak didn't stop there. Elizabeth's love life became a carousel of failed marriages, 8 in total. Each one played out in headlines, each divorce dissected like a public autopsy. And while the world gossiped about her choices, very few understood the emotional toll. She wasn't just unlucky in love, she was bruised by it. Again and again. And then there were the rumors, the ones whispered behind velvet ropes and passed around like Hollywood folklore. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just linked to actors, she was allegedly entangled with some of the most powerful men in American history. Ronald Reagan, John F. Kennedy, Frank Sinatra, Howard Hughes, even Henry Kissinger. Some stories were so sensational, they felt like fiction. Others had just enough smoke to suggest fire. A teenage Elizabeth visiting Reagan's apartment, flirtations with JFK that spiraled into accusations of affairs and secret photos. A rumored pregnancy with Sinatra, allegedly followed by blackmail and hush money. No confirmations, no denials, just endless speculation. These weren't ordinary flings. These were affairs, real or imagined, that danced on the edge of scandal and myth. And whether she pursued them or was pursued, the truth was always murky. Power, beauty, and desire rarely mix without consequences. In Elizabeth's world, they became combustible. But through it all, through the deaths, the divorces, and the whispers, Elizabeth Taylor remained standing. Wounded, yes, but never defeated. Her life was a storm, and she learned to walk through the lightning. Of all the rumors that haunted Elizabeth Taylor's legacy, none are as disturbing or as controversial as those involving 2 future U.S. presidents, Ronald Reagan and John F. Kennedy. Whispers that began decades ago continue to echo. painting a troubling picture of fame, power, and a young woman caught in a world she never fully controlled. The allegations surrounding Reagan are particularly unsettling. At the time, he was in his mid-30s, a rising Hollywood actor with a reputation, a marriage, and considerable influence. Elizabeth Taylor, on the other hand, was barely a teenager. According to one widely circulated but never verified account, Taylor visited Reagan's apartment under the pretense of discussing a potential role. What happened next is where things become murky and deeply uncomfortable. One version of the story claims the two shared a physically intimate encounter, including a makeout session, that allegedly moved into Reagan's bedroom. Some accounts suggest she initiated it, others insist he should have known better. But the very idea that a 15-year-old girl could even be in that situation, alone, vulnerable, under the influence of an older, powerful man, raises serious questions. Was it seduction? Or was it exploitation wrapped in a Hollywood fairy tale? Elizabeth herself, years later, would reportedly joke about the encounter, saying that if Lolita had existed back then, she would have won the Oscar for the role. A laugh masking a trauma? Or a way to deflect the truth with wit? Either way, the story lingers. And then, of course, there's JFK, the charming, risk-taking president known as much for his backroom liaisons as his politics. Elizabeth's name was quietly added to the long list of women linked to him, this time with whispers of secret photographs, hidden affairs, and even a scandalous three-way involving a third party. Again, no proof. But the rumors refused to die. What makes these stories so unsettling isn't just the possibility that they happened, but how easily they were accepted, brushed off, or glamorized. A teenage girl entangled with powerful men, and no one asked the hard questions. Behind the fantasy was something far more dangerous. And if even part of these rumors hold truth, then Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just a starlet in scandal. She was a young woman surrounded by predators in tuxedos. Powerful men who should have protected her, not pursued her. For all the chaos, the heartbreaks, and the scandals that followed her like a shadow, Elizabeth Taylor never let the world define her completely. Beneath the image of a woman draped in diamonds and wrapped in tabloid controversy was something far more grounded. Someone fiercely maternal, deeply loyal, and astonishingly resilient. Despite a love life that often played out like a soap opera, Taylor remained devoted to the one role she protected above all else: being a mother. She had 3 biological children, Michael Jr., Christopher, and Elizabeth Frances, and later adopted a 4th, Maria, the daughter of a close friend. In a life where nothing was truly private, Taylor fought to keep her children out of the glare that had consumed so much of her own childhood. She was a lioness, fierce, protective, and determined to build a stable world for her family, even as her own threatened to collapse. But motherhood wasn't the only space where she found strength. As the years wore on, Elizabeth faced a relentless series of health struggles: broken bones, addiction, over 30 surgeries, and ultimately congestive heart failure. Lesser spirits would have faded quietly. But not Elizabeth. She kept fighting, kept showing up, and most importantly, kept using her voice. In the midst of her own pain, she turned her spotlight toward others. When the AIDS epidemic was being ignored, stigmatized, and feared, Elizabeth Taylor stepped forward, fearlessly. She became one of the first celebrities to publicly champion AIDS research and awareness, raising millions when few dared to speak the word out loud. In doing so, she transformed tragedy into purpose and suffering into service. Because Elizabeth Taylor's legacy is not just about who she loved or what she wore, it's about what she endured. She was a survivor of exploitation, a woman who carried scars the world couldn't see and still chose to rise. Time and again, she turned chaos into strength and heartbreak into grace. So yes, the headlines will always mention her beauty, her affairs, her diamonds, but the real story, the one worth remembering, is of a woman who lived loudly, loved fiercely, and never stopped fighting for her dignity.